Hey folks, I'm back. Let's finish up what we missed out on last week. Finished talking about Plato. I just want to talk a little bit about Shunzi, and then a little discussion of some ways of thinking about ways in your life or kind of ordinary bits of our psychology that may tie into some of these thinkers. I mean this in a kind of lighthearted way. I'll explain in a minute. I don't mean it to be taken too seriously. Just a kind of another way of maybe accessing some of these thinkers at a kind of more personal level. Okay, so let's talk about Shunzi. Shunzi is yet another one of our thinkers from classical China, from the Warring States period. And he's quite famous. Well, is becoming quite famous, even in so-called sort of Western political thought classes, because of the ways in which his thinking is seen as analogous to thinkers like Thomas Hobbes, also Machiavelli to some extent. I'm not saying that's the reason that we should be interested in him. I think he's certainly interesting, absolutely in his own right, and in terms of the conversations that he's having with other thinkers in his era and in his cultural context. But he's got some really interesting crossover ways that his ideas also cross over, and so this is one reason, because of similarity with Hobbes, who is such an important thinker in the early modern tradition. That Shunzi has certainly gotten some pickup. And so you might think, if you're looking at his work, that this idea that human nature is bad, this seemingly negative or pessimistic view of what it is to be a human being, you might initially associate that with with a view like Robert Jeux, or maybe with some of the more imperialistic folks in Thucydides, or even all of the discussions around the Corsairian Revolution about the way that human nature basically reverts back to this kind of more self-interested and even sometimes brutal aspects. Or we could even connect it with the thought of Callicles, and there are connections there. But I think it's important to note that it's actually Mengzi Mencius, who is in many ways closest to Shunzi, although Shunzi also is critical of Mencius. But the fact is that these are both in the Confucian tradition, and so Shunzi is going to stress some differing aspects of human nature in opposition to the slightly more kind of optimistic version that we get with Mengzi. But in terms of the sort of the basic overall cultural architecture set of concepts that he's using, they're informed by the same basic concepts that Mengzi is using. So the focus on ritual and the family and filial piety. He is not a Moist, a believer in these kind of ideals of impartial caring. He's not a Youngist, so he's not like Robert Jeux. He is not going to emphasize a hedonistic. I said that with a weird emphasis. Hedonistic. He's not going to emphasize a hedonistic philosophy. He's certainly not going to advocate for kind of individual selfishness or anything like that. So the basic contrast is with Mengzi, that for Shunzi, he's going to say, look, sages are just different from most people. And so there are certain potentialities to kind of rise above what is the norm of human nature, but it's only through cultivation, or we could even harken back to what we were just talking about with Socrates in the Gorgias. Socrates' focus on self-discipline, we could also see as akin to what Shunzi is talking about, the need for cultivation and the recognition that the sages are the few among us who are able to cultivate and discipline themselves, in opposition to most people who live like a Youngist, like Robert Jeux. Most people just live according to the desires of the moment. Sages are just different, but you can't rely on everyone to be a sage. Sages, too, of course, have natural selfishness, but through a choice that they make and through cultivation inspired by others, learned from others, that they then also work on themselves, they are able to sort of transcend the kind of norm. So it's focus on the sage and the sagely lifestyle, the life of wisdom. You could think of the life of philosophy. So again, a lot of similarities with Socrates. Okay, so the next slide. So we were just on the slide Shunzi. It's slide 24 in the Plato Hanfei Shunzi pack. Next slide on human nature. So, like Mencius, Shunzi is going to say we need laws and we need education, right? Both of them see the need for a structuring environment to help nurture the best in human beings. The big difference, or the kind of way to get at the big difference, is to just think in terms of the kind of controlling metaphors that the two are using. So Mencius is talking about the trees of Ox Mountain that will grow on their own as long as the environment is sort of permitting them to grow to the best of their natural ability. The springs of righteousness, the seeds of righteousness, the good parts of human nature are going to come up naturally. For Shunzi, it's clay that is the controlling metaphor. The idea of modeling or molding clay, human nature as clay, as opposed to human nature as tree, that is, that is really the. I'm not saying it's the inspiration, like that he just that it was like, seeing clay somehow changed his view on something like that. But it's the image that he uses that I think we can think of as kind of controlling his thought. So clay, what is it? It's fine as it is, right? Lumpen, earthy matter. But in order to turn it into something useful, you need a potter. And the sages are the potters of human nature. So it's the sages, and in particular, when the sages were kings, back in the old days, Shunzi says, they were the ones who were like the careful potters who would mold clay and shape it into something useful, shape it into something good. The material was there, like the potential was there, but it required an active intelligence to structure, shape, mold. So human beings are only going to be at their best and are only going to be able to challenge the selfishness and wickedness that is part of their inherent makeup. They're only going to be able to do that if they have someone who, if sages have been in power and have created political structures and social structures that are going to turn selfish human beings into or shape selfish human beings into more cooperative, less conflict-oriented people. So we need wise people creating laws. These people are going to be few and far between. So he's not advocating for a kind of democratic system. But through these laws, sages are going to be able to make the best of us. And so that's what we really are dependent upon to have good human beings. So if we think about the contrast with Mengzi again, Mengzi also will look at sages and kings and consider them also, a part of human nature. And Mengzi also thinks they're important. But I guess we can say that the difference is a difference of emphasis in terms of the individual level versus the species level, or sorry, I guess I should say species level versus individual level. So Mengzi is going to talk about the goodness of human nature because he's thinking about human beings more as a whole, more as the species having these capacities, natural capacities, for goodness, that yes, he acknowledges are certainly assisted by a good environment, and that means good laws, especially. Shunzi seems to focus more on individuals, so his kind of level of analysis is different from Mengzi, and that's why he emphasizes the wickedness rather than the goodness. So in a way, we can see that both of these ways of viewing human beings are part of the Confucian sort of toolkit, conceptual toolkit. If you focus more on humans kind of in the abstract, or humans as we exist in groups, you might be like Mengzi and might focus more on the way that we see goodness as part of human nature. Cooperation, following rules, kindness, filial piety, caring for one's family and one's society. But if you focus more at the individual level, you might be more inclined to see how individuals are trying to sort of cheat their way out of, rules, or, trying to free ride on others, acting selfishly as a way to benefit themselves at the expense of others. And so Shunzi's focus is more on the individual, Mengzi more on the collective, and therefore that leads to a differing emphasis on kind of more optimistic or more human goodness claims for Mengzi, as opposed to the human nature is bad that we get from Shunzi. Okay, so that's going to conclude. I'm running through these things quickly, and I'm happy to answer questions at any time, particularly in relation to essays and exams down the road. I'm going to stop talking about Shunzi at this point, and now I'm going to kind of back up and talk about us as kind of psychological individuals and how we might connect with some of these texts. Okay, so the next slide, it's entitled Colors. And again, let me offer this disclaimer that this is a little bit of lighthearted, a little bit tongue-in-cheek. There's a kind of a serious point to connect here, but I also don't want you taking this, any of this as gospel. So what I have here is there's a system of categorizing personalities called the colors system. And there are actually, I think, slightly different versions of this that have been developed by different psychologists, but it's been around for a while. And you were often taught this in organizations where you're getting some kind of training on how to deal with interpersonal conflict. And so I first learned of this when I was a probation officer back in Arizona in the late 1990s. So I was in law enforcement there for a few years, as I think I may have mentioned in class. So I learned of this system. There's a lot that's wrong about the system, but there are some things. Certainly, you hear this system used, or you will come across it from time to time. And so I think that there are certain aspects that are sometimes useful in focusing on maybe kind of dominant expressed traits in a personality at a given time, but these things shift over time. And so you can be one color earlier in your life and you can change colors. It's really just a kind of, okay, what are you more like at that time? And it's based on the Myers-Briggs psychology test. So based on kind of how you test on Myers-Briggs, that's the fourfold typology: INTJ, ENTJ. It's there are four different categories, and you're one of two things in each of them. Anyway, so that's basically how they come up with this. So, for one thing, don't hold it against me that this is a little bit silly, I grant, and also it's a little simplistic, and also there's even a spelling error on this image that I lifted in the orange category. So again, let's not take this too seriously. But so the way that these personality types are sort of glossed is blue types are more emotional or more creative or more imaginative. Gold types are more kind of organized, loyal, box checkers. It's often called the anal retentive personality type, like wanting to make sure everything is in order. Orange is kind of the action junkie, like act now, let's do something. And then green are the sort of more supposed intellectual, kind of in their head types. Again, this is just saying, here's a kind of slightly more dominant, expressed personality trait in a person at one time. And again, I've changed what I am. So this is not essentializing in any way. The only reason I'm offering this, I've got all these qualifications here. It's just a way of saying, okay, so based on kind of who you think you are, who you think you are in this moment in time, how might you interact, or which types might you be more, which would you be sort of closer to as the kind of thinkers of the thinkers that we have in this class. So the way to get to that is then on the next slide. What do we want from theory? Also, just another qualification to say that these color types, the Myers-Briggs stuff, it's as we think about how you're going to connect from a personality color with a thinker, your ideology is going to shape how your sort of personality type is going to connect with a thinker. So, for instance, the orange types, which I'm connecting with critical theory, because there is a way in which orange types have that kind of critical mindset, but it's also the case that most people who are police sort of test out as orange types, and most people who are in the police force are more conservative and are not like critical theory types. So again, it's, you have to take this somewhat with a grain of salt. But again, I'm just picking up on some tendencies and some connections here. So orange, the idea of being kind of action oriented and like, let's change things now, wanting change, we could connect with critical theory. If you recall the 4 types of theory that I began the semester with: critical theory, normative theory, imaginative theory, and conceptual historical. The gold types, the organized types, I think are going to be more interested, again, tend to be more interested in a kind of normative theorizing, which is more about, okay, here are the rules, here are the norms for society, here's how we ought to behave. Blue types, I think, are going to be more inclined to the imaginative or creative type of political theory, kind of attuned to the pain of the world as a blue type, and also like, oh, hey, why can't it be different? Another world is possible. That's a kind of blue way of thinking. And then green types, I think, are going to be more attracted to a kind of conceptual or historical thinking. So, what is the history? Let's get back into how the traditions sort of fit together, and how the ideas fit together, and kind of logical analysis of ideas. So green types, I think, are going to be more into conceptual historical type. Okay, next slide. And this is the final slide for this little lecture. So 4 functions of theory, this is one way of categorizing the thinkers. I put them each into a category. That's a gold kind of thing to do, by the way. But there are problems with that categorization. So note that I'm saying for the normative types, the gold types, the box checkers, the organized types, right? Wake up and make sure you have a list of things to do in a day and like check those things off. I'm saying Homer can fit with that because Homer, as Homer was traditionally taught in ancient Athens, was as providing the rules for how one should be a good human being. Now, of course, we have seen, and I have pitched to you, alternative readings of Homer that are imaginative and historical and critical, right? Homer as, gangster rapper. So, to say that maybe Homer is in the normative box, or you might connect with him, that's assuming on the kind of, offering rules for how to live in a society, how to be a good person, how to control anger, right? If it's all about control of anger, then Homer's going to be more in that normative sort of gold box. And similarly with Mozi, so I think the others fit a little bit more neatly. That Mozi and Mengzi and Plato and Xunzi are probably going to be closer to the normative. There's more kinship there. Plato, I think we could also see comfortably in imaginative, historical, and critical too. So, some of these thinkers you're definitely going to be able to, engage with at different levels. I thought that the discussion of Sophocles' Medea and feminism, and then also the discussions about Lao Tzu and the Tao Te Ching, I think, are much more in the imaginative or creative vein. Although obviously you could pick up different aspects there, but the conceptual historical, I think, so as a green type, you might be more interested in the historical Thucydides. I do have Plato there as well, and then Han Fei and the notions of how rhetoric works and kind of the logical analysis of concepts of persuasion, effective persuasion, ineffective persuasion. And then finally with critical, oh, what was I saying? So I'm looking at my slides and I'm not even, I should edit this, but I'm not going to edit this. So for imaginative, I said Euripides, Medea, but I actually have Sophocles up there. Again, it shows, I think there are ways of being a blue type and connecting with Medea. Sophocles' Antigone was what I had actually meant to foreground there, as a kind of looking for the politics of the impossible, for looking for other possibilities. And then critical, I think probably Euripides and Medea as critical feminist. I think that probably does make more sense as a kind of critical perspective, and maybe an orange type way of approaching things. And then Robert Jeu for a very different way of being adventurous than a kind of critical feminist perspective on Medea. Robert Jeu's much more live for the day, live for your body and its pleasures, and that's it, and it's going to change from day to day, and just get what you can before you die. Anyway, so maybe this helps you have a little different way of accessing some of these thinkers, if you think about kind of how some of your own personality traits may intersect with some of them. And again, I'm not offering this typology in any kind of definitive sense. I think there are multiple ways that personality types can engage with each thinker. So don't. I guess my final message here is maybe try to be a blue type more so than this typology would even suggest. A blue type in the sense of being imaginative and creative, and don't limit yourself to saying, oh, I'm this, and so therefore I need to engage with a thinker in this one particular way. Leave yourself open to possibilities. So again, this is just one possible suggestion for how to engage, how to connect with these folks. Okay, I will see everybody in class this week. No pain medicine so far this morning. Feeling good. Okay, cheers, folks.